Coca leaves were declared an illegal substance under the 1961 United Nations Convention on Narcotics, but the cultivation of coca leaves for religious and medicinal purposes is legal and licensed in Bolivia. The coca leaf is sacred within Andean indigenous culture, used in everything from traditional ceremonies to green tea for altitude sickness. However, its use for cocaine is what has prompted the government crackdown on growers in recent decades. Chewing the coca leaf, which contains a mild stimulant, provides energy for arduous tasks like agriculture and mining, and is also a lightweight source of protein. In addition, 87% of the inhabitants of the small towns and rural communities in Bolivia use the coca leaf for health purposes. For the indigenous people of Andean Bolivia, who have been growing and consuming the coca leaf for over 1,000 years, the rising demand for cocaine in the United States is rapidly restructuring their economic and social relations. Coca growers in Chapare, known locally as cocaleros, have faced intense scrutiny and discrimination due to the increasing demand for drug-related exportation of the leaf. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Bolivia is the third largest producer of cocaine in the world. Bureau Report, Democracy News Live, Bolivia.
Good evening, I'm Rohit Gandhi and you're watching Democracy News Live. Welcome to our show, It Matters. Today, we have a show about coca farms and coca farmers in Bolivia, speaking out about drug-related stereotypes in the region. The coca leaf has endured a state of infamy worldwide due to an increased demand for cocaine in places like the United States. However, we see nothing of the reality of the lives of the small farmers who are affected by the notoriety of this seemingly innocuous plant. Deep within the Bolivian Amazon region of Chapare, our reporter and our Latin America bureau chief, Autumn, spoke with some of the cocaleros who paint a much different picture of life than we've seen in the media to date. Joining us from Bolivia is our Latin America bureau chief, Autumn Spredemann. Autumn is a journalist and an educator who has been living and traveling through South America for the past 4 years. Autumn, thank you for joining us. Let me start by asking you, so what were your first impressions as you met the cocaleros and the coca farmers in Chapare?
Well, my first impression when we got there was that people are very nice, but they're also very cautious, almost suspicious. But the people, once you got to know them and speak to them a little more, they were actually really friendly. So, and I wouldn't say there was any feeling of hostility or rudeness. It was more just people were very wary of you when you came in as an outsider. This is a region that Bolivians from other areas don't necessarily travel to so much, let alone a foreigner.
So,
So it was interesting.
so when you did out these interviews, the coca farmers, I guess, gave you a lot of, they had a lot of questions for you, but they also had a lot of answers for you. Let's listen into, something that they talked about and give us a little bit of a sense of what they were saying.
So basically, in the interview, the first interview I did, we talked a lot about how much of the cocaine coming out of Bolivia, how much of the coca leaves is actually made into cocaine. Because this leaf is used for medicinal reasons and it's sold in markets in Bolivia, which is not necessarily as much the case in a place like Colombia, for example. It was actually interesting. One of the cocaleros actually said he mentioned that 100% of the coca that is grown in Colombia is actually is made for cocaine. So, but in Bolivia, he's estimated about 50% of that actually gets sold in markets throughout the country for medicinal purposes. So it's actually not nearly as much as you would have expected. I have seen far larger estimates. coming out of the region. So it was kind of surprising when they said half of it is actually just used for regular things.
So let's listen into the farmer's clip.
Coca has medicinal properties that has been well documented and goes back to the time of the Incas, so well over 1,000 years. With that in mind, now all of a sudden, in recent years, with only maybe the last, 60 to 70 years, has the fabrication of the coca plant into a narcotic become a popular thing? As we know, cocaine is incredibly popular throughout the world. That this plant has been used medicinally and for other reasons for so long. So would you say, is it possible that maybe just a small percentage of people are making this entire production and operation look bad? Or would you say that the production of coca into a narcotic is the majority of what it's used for now, specifically in this region?
Bueno, de lo que puedo apreciar desde mi entorno, mi parte turística, que es lo que yo acá más me identifico, ¿sí? Yo me identifico acá tengo un cultivo de abejas también, que después lo vemos más adelante. Como personas como yo, pues estamos pensando en otras cosas aparte de la coca, que también son ricas, ¿sí? Pero yo diría, al entrar hacia el Chaco, hay más coca que cultivos frutales, que, que cultivos para nuestra propia alimentación, nuestro propio bien. Entonces, en cuanto al bienestar que presenta para nosotros la humanidad, creería, teniendo pues aparte los problemas políticos y del gobierno, eh, se diría que podría ser un 50-50, la lucha contra el narcotráfico, como lo estamos en los países más cabezas del narcotráfico, como México, Colombia, y han sido muy destacados y mal vistos en el mundo porque es más lo que producen en coca que para el bienestar de la misma humanidad. Entonces diría yo de que el país se pudiera contagiar, y diría que serían 50 y 50 ahora de lo que aportan bien y de lo que se diría que aportaría el mal para un narcotráfico.
And what was really shocking for me, because we have these impressions of what's going on in this region of Bolivia based on outside media, about like all this, this massive drug operation, that it's incredibly dangerous to even set foot in this region. And that's really just not the case. It was surprising, um, based on, the information I had going in, that, people are just regular people kind of living normal lives for the most part, at least from what I saw while I was there.
So when you look at a movie from the West, when you look at these, farms where they're growing, they all look as if they're all criminals running around with guns, and these farmers, and where they're processing these units of cocaine. And when you actually went on the ground, did you get this impression that here they all were armed and they had guns and they were protecting themselves, or was it a different feeling?
Honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect, and I kind of went into it with that same impression, that when I went to one of the coca plantations and spoke with the owner and his son, and they actually took us into the jungle to see the coca growing production, I expected to see all of the stereotypes you imagine in Western media, like guys with guns and all that. And really, it was just a small farming operation. Not to say that, guys with guns aren't somewhere out there protecting the actual drug fabrication facilities. They probably are, but that it's such a small part of the actual farming life that goes on there. The majority of the people there are really just farmers, and there's really none of that, that scary cinematic-esque violence or danger that you would see there, which was a pleasant surprise for me, believe me.
Autumn, when we started working on this story, one of my first, questions to you was in terms of why do these people grow this when they know that it becomes part of such a large drug trade? Is this really lucrative? What is it? Why are they growing it?
Well, truth be told, the coca leaf has been around for well over 1,000 years, and the consumption and use of it for medicinal reasons goes back to a time before the Inca. So what we're seeing is, from their perspective, they basically said, hey, some people want to pay me 10 times the amount of money for this leaf now, and it goes wherever, and they do whatever with it. I'm not going to say no. So, from the farmer's perspective, it's really no big deal because they've been growing this for so long and it's still being used medicinally within Bolivia. There's a disconnect there where they're not seeing, the violence and drug consumption and all that because it's not a part of their lives. And, the United States might as well be another planet, for these small farmers. It's just another world for them. And they're just doing what they've done generationally for so long.
So the farmer you spoke to, Autumn, he did talk about its medicinal use, but he never really mentioned, the price difference in growing cocoa leaves and anything else.
No, we didn't. But that's what's interesting is that, Bolivia grows a lot of, crops for consumption, but coca by far is the literal cash crop here, where you will get paid a lot more money to grow coca than you will corn or mangoes or any of the other, products that come from that region that are cultivated there. So from the perspective of a small farmer, and small farmers don't get paid a lot in Bolivia to begin with, even though they produce so much, um, from the perspective of a farmer, it's easy to see why they would want to grow coca because from their end, they're not really doing anything bad. They're just growing a plant, and wherever it goes from there is not really an issue. So
So
yeah, I mean the
these,
price for coca is easily 10 times more than
so
what you get
these
paid growing corn.
farmers, sorry, these farmers, Autumn, do they belong to where they are growing today? Are these local farmers and they've lived here for thousands of years?
Interestingly enough, the cocaleros, which is what they call the coca growers that are in the Chapare region, are yes Bolivian, but they are not from that region. They are actually from the Andean region of Bolivia, which is in the west, which brings into place some interesting conflict and dynamic with the Amazonian indigenous people who live in the area. So when the cocaleros came in and they started cultivating coca, it created some conflict with the indigenous who did not want to see that crop, cultivated there for a number of reasons.
And what were those reasons?
Well, the primary among them being that they are afraid the Amazonian indigenous people who are already in the region when the people from the west came, who are primarily Quechua. They came in and they started cultivating coca. They're worried about the disruption of the land, the natural landscape, how that's going to change. Their ability to fish, their ability to cultivate plants that are actually native to the jungle region, because coca is not necessarily native to that region as a plant either, and it requires a lot of land, um, is for growing. So the indigenous of the area, of the Amazonian area there in Chapare, are worried about, the displacement of animals, the destruction and disruption of the natural landscape, and it changing their ability to, have the plants that they're used to having cultivated there. And I would say that's only about half of them, because the other half of the Amazonian indigenous people actually want to cultivate coca leaves because it brings in so much money. And they're thinking, hey, this is could be a lot of money for our rural communities. Maybe we could finally have a hospital or things like that. So there's actually tension within the Amazonian indigenous communities there too that has been started by all this coca cultivation.
Let's talk a little bit about the interactions with the indigenous communities, the lesser contacted indigenous communities here. Would you say there have there has been talk, unsubstantiated, that the cocaleros and some of the lesser um, known indigenous communities here have had some
interactions that weren't necessarily very friendly. Would you say that that's true? Has there been any conflict in their interactions with some of the indigenous communities here, or no, or not that you're aware of?
Por supuesto. Es decir, el momento se vuelve el pan de cada día en esos conflictos, ¿sí? Porque hay oposiciones que quieren impedir el manejo de la coca y temen a que todo esto que te he acabado de mencionar, como frutas y como turismo y toda esta riqueza que presenta este lugar para extranjeros y para las mismas personas de acá de Bolivia, del país, que vienen a disfrutar del sol, a disfrutar del ambiente, del río, de la vegetación, de los animales, temen de que lo hagan a un lado, de que lo hagan a un lado y solo se concentren en la coca y las frutas y todo ese turismo muera. Entonces hay protestas donde obviamente quieren darle prioridad a, a lo de la vida cotidiana que necesita el ser humano acá, que es frutas y se den a conocer de lo bueno, no siempre pensar que solo se metieron a coca y el 90% va a ser coca. Entonces, esas son las discusiones, los problemas que tienen los colones con los indígenas. El indígena siempre quiere mantener su tierra, conservar el ambiente, ¿sí? Quieren conservar toda esa riqueza que tienen y entonces no quieren que solamente vaya a ser un 90% coca, no, sino para medicina, más 40% coca, 60% frutas, felicidad para la visión del turista, que no tenga miedo.
So I understand that the pushback from the indigenous people, obviously for the coca is because they are growing a crop that doesn't belong to the region. But is there, are there more layers to this? Because I would think that the indigenous people, like, for example, in the Andaman Nicobar Islands of India, there are indigenous people who don't want anybody coming in from the outside. Are there more reasons for these indigenous people not wanting the cocaleras there?
Well, yes, actually. And it was something that was mentioned a couple of different times. The indigenous communities in the area, they are not truly uncontacted tribes. They're semi-modernized tribes where they do have, you know, they do have a degree of contact with the modern world. They wear modern clothes. There is that to some degree, but they do try to live in as traditional of a fashion as possible. But the other thing that they are concerned about is the money they get from non-governmental organizations might dry up if they start widely cultivating the coca plant, because specifically in the Chapare region, it is highly stigmatized. So they're worried about nonprofit money going away. That's the other part of it.
Well, that's a very interesting way of looking at this. So what you're saying is, because if they modernize too fast, they look too smart already, the rest of the world's going to look at them and say, why do these people even need us anymore? They've now modernized. So they want to stay indigenous in many, many ways, even more far-rooted than they possibly can become, so that they can continue getting the non-government money, to run their lives. Is that what you're saying, Autumn?
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying, Autumn?
I do think that. I think that's part of it. Um, and I mean, we drove farther in to that region as well, pretty much as far as you can go until the road gives out and becomes essentially a goat path that a bus somehow makes it down like once a week to one of the indigenous communities there. I mean, and I can see why non-governmental organization kind of money would be so important to a place like that. I mean, just they have limited ability to get income. I mean, and even if they were cultivating their, some kind of a crop, if they wanted to sell fish from the river, I mean, just the transportation difficulties alone are, monumental. So getting this extra money, I think, is really important to them. I mean, if I was living, if that was really my only means of income, I mean, I would probably feel the same way.
And then that's the whole thing, Autumn. When you get down to, actually going on the ground and interacting with the people on the ground, your impressions about those people actually turns to be more real than, when you look at it distantly, subjectively from the eyes of, what somebody else has portrayed for you. And you get a very, very different sense. And that's the whole idea of journalism on the ground, is you get there and you meet people and you begin understanding them rather than, looking at them from a distance and looking at them as, oh my God, all these coca farmers, they should all be gone. Or these are all terrorists, they should all be killed. Those are not, that's not how the world works. That's not how the world works as a community. Autumn, thank you for going out there and, actually stepping out of comfort zone to go and actually live the life there and see these people there and understand their perspectives. Thank you, Autumn. And that's the whole thing about cocaine. Now, nobody is saying that cocaine is a great drug and people should be consuming it. Cocaine's bad. It's a psychotropic. It creates a lot of addiction around the world. But that said, these farmers need an alternate route. These farmers need to do something else. They just can't be pushed out and said, all right, stop doing coca. They've been growing it traditionally also for their medicinal use. So that needs to be understood. What needs to be worked on is the drug cartels. What needs to be worked on is how do these drugs get smuggled into your countries, and how does your population become an addict? Most of this cocaine goes to Western countries to be sold and consumed. It doesn't get consumed even in these regions where it's produced. So that understanding must be clear. Easy to point fingers, but it's more important to be more objective when you look at regions and people. Thanks for watching Democracy News Live and our show It Matters. Thank you again, Autumn, for getting out there. I know it's risky. It's not an easy task. Good night and good luck.